One needs but read any of the Christian agitators, for example St. Augustine, in order to realize, in order to smell, what filthy fellows came to the top. It would be an error, however, to assume that there was any lack of understanding in the leaders of the Christian movement. But they were clever. Clever to the point of holiness, these fathers of the Church. What they lacked was something quite different. Nature neglected, perhaps forgot, to give them even the most modest endowment of respectable, of upright, of cleanly instincts. Between ourselves, they are not even men. If Islam despises Christianity, it has 1,000-fold right to do so. Islam at least assumes that it is dealing with men. 60. Christianity destroyed for us the whole harvest of ancient civilization, and later it also destroyed for us the whole harvest of Mohammedan civilization. The wonderful culture of the Moors in Spain, which was fundamentally nearer to us and appealed more to our senses and tastes than that of Rome and Greece, was trampled down, I do not say by what sort of feat. Why? Because it had to thank noble and manly instincts for its origin, because it said yes to life, even to the rare and refined luxuriousness of Moorish life. The Crusaders later made war on something before which it would have been more fitting for them to have grovelled in the dust, a civilization beside which even that of our 19th century seems very poor and very senile. What they wanted, of course, was booty. The Orient was rich. Let us put aside our prejudices. The Crusades were a higher form of piracy, nothing more. The German nobility, which is fundamentally a Viking nobility, was in its element there. The Church knew only too well how the German nobility was to be won. The German noble, always the Swiss guard of the Church, always in the service of every bad instinct of the Church, but well paid. Consider the fact that it is precisely the aid of German swords and German blood and valour that has enabled the Church to carry through its war to the death upon everything noble on earth. At this point, a host of painful questions suggest themselves. The German nobility stands outside the history of the higher civilization. The reason is obvious. Christianity, alcohol, the two great means of corruption. Intrinsically, there should be no more choice between Islam and Christianity than there is between an Arab and a Jew. The decision is already reached. Nobody remains at liberty to choose here. Either a man is a Chandala or he is not. War to the knife with Rome, peace and friendship with Islam. This was the feeling. This was the act of that great free spirit, that genius among German emperors, Friedrich II. What? Must a German first be a genius, a free spirit, before he can feel decently? I can't make out how a German could ever feel Christian. 61. Here it becomes necessary to call up a memory that must be 100 times more painful to Germans. The Germans have destroyed, for Europe, the last great harvest of civilization that Europe was ever to reap, the Renaissance. Is it understood at last? Will it ever be understood what the Renaissance was? The transvaluation of Christian values, an attempt with all available means, all instincts and all the resources of genius to bring about a triumph of the opposite values, the more noble values. This has been the one great war of the past. There has never been a more critical question than that of the Renaissance. It is my question, too. There has never been a form of attack more fundamental, more direct, or more violently delivered by a whole front upon the centre of the enemy. To attack at the critical place, at the very seat of Christianity, and there enthrone the more noble values, that is to say, to insinuate them into the instincts, into the most fundamental needs and appetites of those sitting there. I see before me the possibility of a perfectly heavenly enchantment and spectacle. It seems to me to scintillate with all the vibrations of a fine and delicate beauty, and within it there is an art so divine, so infernally divine, that one might search in vain for thousands of years for another such possibility. I see a spectacle so rich in significance, and at the same time so wonderfully full of paradox, that it should arouse all the gods on Olympus to immortal laughter. Caesar Borgia as Pope. Am I understood? Well then, that would have been the sort of triumph that I alone am longing for today. By it, Christianity would have been swept away. What happened? A German monk, Luther, came to Rome. This monk, with all the vengeful instincts of an unsuccessful priest in him, raised a rebellion against the Renaissance in Rome. Instead of grasping with profound thanksgiving the miracle that had taken place, the conquest of Christianity at its capital, instead of this, his hatred was stimulated by the spectacle. A religious man thinks only of himself. Luther saw only the depravity of the papacy at the very moment when the opposite was becoming apparent. The old corruption, the peccatum originale, Christianity itself, no longer occupied the papal chair. Instead, there was life. Instead, there was the triumph of life. Instead, there was a great yea to all lofty, beautiful, and daring things. And Luther restored the Church. He attacked it. The Renaissance, an event without meaning, a great futility. Ah, these Germans, what they have not cost us. Futility, that has always been the work of the Germans. The Reformation, Leibniz, Kant, and so-called German philosophy. The War of Liberation, the Empire, every time a futile substitute for something that once existed, for something irrecoverable. These Germans, I confess, are my enemies. I despise all their uncleanliness in concept and valuation, their cowardice before every honest yea and nay. For nearly 1,000 years they have tangled and confused everything their fingers have touched. They have on their conscience all the half-way measures, all the 3/8 way measures that Europe is sick of. They also have on their conscience the uncleanest variety of Christianity that exists, and the most incurable and indestructible, Protestantism. If mankind never manages to get rid of Christianity, the Germans will be to blame.